Hey y'all, how's it going? Welcome to the show. It's my show, The Scott Horton Show. And I think here in a minute, as soon as the talking starts, I'm probably going to, well, I don't know how long of a thing it's going to be and how much time I'll give him, but I think I want to hear John Kerry talk bad enough right now that I'm going to make y'all listen to it too. He's fixing to give a speech according to CNN. He had a meeting with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, about the Ukraine crisis, and so we'll see whether his tone of voice has changed at all since yesterday. We talked with Ray McGovern on the show. Was it yesterday or the day before when Obama interrupted John Kerry's talk to say the very same thing in a much more measured tone? We could do sanctions, we could do this, we could do that. We sure would like to see the Russians leave the Crimean Peninsula. Whereas Kerry was going, rah, 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 you better do this, that, and the other thing, or else. I hate that guy. And anyway, so I guess we'll see what he says. I'm anxious to know what he says. So that should be coming up before guest time starts. So why not? Should be here in just a minute. Let's see, is that thunder? Something just explode down the block? Did you guys hear that? I guess it could have been thunder. A plane crash or something. Anyway, MJ Rosenberg's going to be on the show today to talk about AIPAC. And their meeting this week. Benjamin Netanyahu's speech and Israel/American policy toward Palestine, Iran, Syria. Politics regarding the Israel lobby itself in Washington, D.C. I think you're probably going to hear something along the lines of how some of AIPAC are actually quite against staking out a position directly opposite the President of the United States on the Iran issue like this. Their whole theory is that American and Israeli policy are the exact same thing anyway, man, so don't worry about it. But this is bringing the discrepancy to a head and making it a bit too obvious for those in the Israel lobby who have more than a couple of brain cells to rub together and can think, I don't know, a few weeks into the future. For example, what about after you lose and the nuclear deal is done and you were the only ones who were trying to stop it and you failed? Or worse, what if you succeed? What if the entire American foreign policy establishment wants to deal with Iran and the Israel lobby are the only ones pushing against it and who succeed in making the Congress thwart it somehow or that kind of thing? How's that going to work out for your future power and authority after Walt Mearsheimer Volume 2 comes out? Good thinking there, guys. Well, anyway. So MJ's going to be on to talk about that, and, really in a way, the worse the Hawks are, and the more in the lobby split off from them, the more divided the lobby is, the better, in a way. I guess, the opposite is the better truth, that the more people in the Israel lobby prefer peace, the more the Hawks break away and divide the lobby and its power. Either way. Also, Grant Smith is going to be on, and he's going to be on to talk about the opposite of the AIPAC meeting this week, the National Summit to reassess the American-Israel special relationship. That's this Friday, all day, from 8 to 5, at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. I'll see you there first thing in the morning. I'm giving the opening welcome, everybody. And then I will be moderating one of the panels later in the day as well. You'll hear a commercial for this coming up here in just a minute. It's, all of my guests, basically all in one big place talking about stuff. It's going to be really good. And Grant Smith is helping to put it on. Of course, he's the guy from the the Institute for Research Middle East Policy, which is all about what's behind Israel's role as a special interest in Washington, D.C. What is it they're getting away with it, and how? What is it they're getting away with, and how do they get away with it? So he's going to be on the show to talk a little bit about that with us today. And I hope that if you're on the eastern seaboard over there, up in Yankeetown, it's all Yankeetown to me. I'm from Texas. If you're from there, show up. It'd be good to see you. I'll be in Washington, D.C. I haven't been there since I was 4. Now I go back twice within a month. Huh. What do you know about that? By the way, in case you missed it, the last time I was there was on February the 15th, and I gave a speech with John Glazer, even though that's not quite true because I didn't even get there till he was done because of ice on my airplane's wings that needed removing and other controversies with the airlines. And so, but anyway, it's 2 for 1 there. It's John Glazer gives a talk and answers some questions, and then I give a talk and don't answer questions. And you can watch the video if you want at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show, or you can go to my blog or my website, scotthorton.org/speeches. In fact, it's on my blog too, scotthorton.org/stress. You know, like my ulcer. scotthorton.org/stress. You can see the video there. John Glazer does a good talk about libertarianism and anti-imperialism and how important it all is. And my speech isn't really about that. It's just about the empire. The way it was supposed to work was I was going to go on about the empire, and then he was going to go on about, you see why it's so important to oppose this thing all the time? But, of course, what happened was it got all disjointed and out of place because of the frozen precipitation. But anyway, I think, you know what, and I do make excuses, and I'm glad that I make excuses in the actual video, because I did sort of fall short. There were about 6 major, or at least 3 or 4 major things that I meant to say that weren't in there. And I got the order of my talk a little bit out of order, where I went, you know, I meant to do after the end of the Cold War, I meant to do expansion in Europe, and then expansion in the Middle East leading into the terror war kind of thing. But then I ended up, I just, you know, spaced out, and I did the Middle East, and then I did NATO expansion, and then I went back to terrorism, but then, so there wasn't much of a segue between NATO expansion, you know, including the Baltic states and Poland, whatever, and then the terror war, other than derp, I mean, I don't mean that NATO expansion, including Poland, provoked bin Laden. I mean the other part that I was talking about before, about the Middle East, yeah, that thing. So that's a major failure. That's the major failure of the thing. And then there's a bunch of excluded stuff. But you know what? I bet if I didn't tell you, you might think it was all right. I don't know. It was pretty good. And thanks again to Jacob Hornberger at the Future Freedom Foundation and all the guys at the Future Freedom Foundation for having me do that. Because I like talking about that because I think it's really important. Oh, I think it's the most important thing. Other than the nuclear standoff between America and Russia, which the damned Democrats have now succeeded in making a thing again. Ask yourself, why did Barack Obama make Dick Cheney's advisor and Robert Kagan's wife, Victoria Nuland, the ambassador to Europe? And why did he give her $1 zillion to spend on the opposition over there? And why did he give her carte blanche to threaten sanctions against every billionaire oligarch in the country if they didn't forsake this guy and drive him out of town, Yanukovych? Why did he do all these things? Did it ever occur to you that Barack Obama is a Democrat and that that's really bad and evil? That's my theory. I know people have all their theories. I think he was born in Kenya. I think he's a Muslim. I think that he's some kind of left-wing Christian, that we don't like that kind of Christian. Or I think that he's a Black Panther. I think he's a centrist. The worst kind of political extremist in America. And you know what? I mean, do we have any evidence that he hesitated to hire Victoria Nuland, Robert Kagan's wife, and former advisor to Dick Cheney, to be his ambassador to the European Union? This is Obama's project. He's the one who brung us to this. And man, I already kind of pissed away that whole first segment. I'm sorry, y'all. I got some ground to cover about Ukraine when we get back, because I have a whole bunch of invites out, and I don't know if I'm going to hear back from any of these guys at this point. 3 of them are about Ukraine. One of them is about this CIA thing that I got to cover, the torture scandal deal here. and then Ukraine, and then I have at least 2 interviews, so I'm going to cram a bunch of talking into the next segment. Sorry for wasting this one, but now here's some George Clinton and some spots. And then we'll be right back. It's the Scott Horton Show on the Liberty Express.
Hey, Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new book by Michael Swanson, The War State. In The War State, Swanson examines how Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy both expanded and fought to limit the rise of the new national security state after World War II. If this nation is ever to live up to its creed of liberty and prosperity for everyone, we are going to have to abolish the empire. Know your enemy. Get The War State by Michael Swanson. It's available at your local bookstore or at Amazon.com in Kindle or in paperback. Just click the book in the right margin at scotthorton.org or thewarstate.com. Hey, Scott Horton here for The Future of Freedom, the monthly journal of the Future Freedom Foundation at fff.org/subscribe. Since 1989, FFF has been pushing an uncompromising moral and economic case for peace, individual liberty, and free markets. Sign up now for The Future Freedom, featuring founder and president Jacob Hornberger, as well as Sheldon Richmond, James Bovard, Anthony Gregory, Wendy McElroy, and many more. It's just $25 a year for the print edition, $15 per year to read it online. That's fff.org/subscribe. And tell them Scott sent you.
All right, you guys. Welcome back to the thing here. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. MJ Rosenberg and Grant Smith are coming up on the show here in just a little while. And so here, let me get through a bunch of stuff. First of all, go to my website, scotthorton.org. Go to all the different subsections of my website. Click around. It's pretty nice, man. Dave made it for me. It's great. And also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at /Scott Horton Show. And like me and share me and retweet me, please. Okay, great. Thank you. /Scott Horton Show for all of those. Okay. Now, I failed yesterday. I'm sitting here running out the clock on Hirsch. I can tell Hirsch, and that is Michael Hirsch, Hirsh, formerly, I believe, with Newsweek, and now writing for the National Journal. He's just a hard news reporter guy. He's not very much of an ideologue, even on an issue like endless drone war kind of thing. He's a very, reasonable guy. So he just says, hey, this is all very secret and pretty objectionable that it's in secret, and we ought to have a debate about it. Very conventional kind of opinions. Perfectly fine. But I didn't have much more to say other than, can you believe this kind of crap going on here? And then so he got pretty tired of that and was ready to go, and I ended up letting him go early. And of course, I didn't even break into the subject of the important point, which could have been about the targeting of American citizens with drones, and of course the leak that they plan to do some more of this stuff. Oh, now John Kerry's going to interrupt me. Well, here, I got the closed caption on. I'll keep an eye. Are they closed cap? Okay, they're captioning it. Ah, hell, I'll play the audio. Damn it, John Kerry. I was trying to... Anyway, so I apologize for that. That's why I should have asked Hirsch, and I hate it when I think later of what I should have said or asked.
As Syria's conflict spills over Lebanon's borders, and as the refugee crisis...
Shut up. That's your war in Syria. I don't want to hear all this. All right, anyway. So that's my failure on the Hirsch thing. I got that out of the way. Now, so John Kerry, I don't know. Yeah. Let me say this part. You may not have heard this. You may assume otherwise. So I'll go ahead and do you the favor of clarifying that I hate Vladimir Putin as much as I hate any politician who doesn't have direct authority over me. And that's a lot. It's just not exactly the same as the hatred I have for, so-called officials in my society. But as far as bad guys in the world, I consider all politicians by default are burning in whatever hell they believe in, fine. How much worse than that can they be, I told you before on the show, you may not have heard it, but I have mentioned on the show before how my wife, Larissa Alexandrovna, investigative journalist, and Eric Margulies, good friend of the show, who you're all very familiar with, who's also a reporter for many, many years, they both were friends with this lady, a Russian journalist named Anna Politskaya. I'm sorry, I can't say this kind of thing. Just because I married a lady who talks Russian don't mean I can pronounce it right. And anyway, they say Putin murdered her. And if that's what my wife says, and that's a fact, Jack, and I don't just mean because I love her, but I mean because check her reporting. She's badass. And she knows that Putin murdered that lady. She doesn't believe that. And I think the same thing can be said for Eric Margulies. So, there you go. I have a personal beef with Vladimir Putin. He murdered my wife's friend. So that means I hate him more than a lot of other politicians in the world. So that means that I sure as hell am not on his side, much less on Russia's side or the Pink Army's side. Whatever you call it now. I mean pink like pale red, not like I'm accusing them of all being gay or something. Don't get me wrong. I'm very politically correct on those kind of issues. But man, so the thing of it is that people live. I heard Sheldon Richman and I talked about this the other day, and he talked about this with Jacob Hornberger on the libertarian angle too. And people live in such a binary world. I get it. I got two eyes. You know, I feel gravity. So there's up and down and left and right and black and white and all kinds of opposites of every kind, liberal and conservative. You ever heard of those? I heard they're the opposite of each other on everything somehow. But actually, in fact, there is no law of the universe that limits the sides of any conflict to two, or opinions that could be held. There's 7 billion people in the world. That's 7 billion opinions right there. And then, you know, and change, more than 7 billion, right? But also, you have people who have lots of different opinions about the same thing, some of which are a little bit contradictory sometimes and whatever. And, you know, lots of people have lots of different opinions about all kinds of stuff. So, it's kind of silly, but it's necessary to point out that just because I hate Barack Obama and would like to see him strapped to a rocket and blasted off into the sun, doesn't mean that I'm on the side of Russia just because Obama happens to be in a conflict with Russia. Okay? So grow up a little bit. I don't think it's right, if that's even the question at all. I don't think it's in question, much less the question, whether Russia should have invaded Crimea. The point is simply that, other than the small minority of Muslim Tatars or however you pronounce it there, the place is super majority ethnic Russian, pro-Russian. They have their own parliament. They're like a separate semi-autonomous state in the Ukrainian system since the fall of the Soviet Union. They don't have a president anymore, but they do have their own parliament and prime minister. And they haven't objected to this. At least the reports are. I can't verify as absolute fact myself, I guess. The reports are, and I don't think this is just coming from the Russians. I think this is coming from the Crimeans. That no, they asked for this. This is fine. The Russians have a giant base there, and for all we know, the majority of those soldiers on the streets out there were already at that base. Although, I mean, I guess they did. There were reports of planes coming in and landing at the airport, you know, which I guess could have very well been full of Russian soldiers. But I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but seems to me the obvious answer for why they ripped off their Russian insignia, their flags off of their uniforms, was they're trying to keep it semi-deniable. As Ray McGovern said, you guys have seen the movie 14 Days about the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the Democrats and Robert McNamara and JFK, they're very sophisticated. They don't call it a blockade. They call it a quarantine. And McNamara is screaming at the admiral, the know-it-all admirals who don't know nothing, that, hey, stupid, this is a language going on at sea out there, okay? And I didn't tell you it was your turn to talk. So shut up and do what I tell you, and you don't fire a warning shot unless I tell you to fire a warning shot, and whatever. It's all language. On the ground or at sea. And so whether or not America sails an aircraft carrier into the Black Sea is relevant. See how that's language. What degree of a threat are you leveling? That kind of thing. Well, the language of the seizing of the Crimean Peninsula, it seems to me the insignia-less seizing makes it deniable. And this is what Putin said in at least his first statement on the issue yesterday was, oh, I don't know who those guys are, man. They must be the local pro-Russian militia. because I didn't send them there. They're not the Russian army, which everyone is laughing at and saying is stupid, but it's not stupid. It means that he can take it back easily. It means that he can leave them there for a week. If the Americans don't screw it all up, it means he can leave them there, and then he can take them back and say, oh, yeah, oh, well, you know, local pro-Russian militia, your services will no longer be required. Thank you very much. And then he can withdraw them, but save face and not have to lose so much face and let, Kerry dance around claiming, ha-ha, I forced you to have to withdraw from Crimea, right? I'm not saying that's the definite answer, but it seems like it. And then what does that imply? That implies that he doesn't really mean that he's going to invade eastern Ukraine. I'm not saying it can't happen, but probably it won't. And I will refer you, and I meant to say this, I swear, last week and this week too. And it's on the bottom of my list. I got way too many notes and I keep blowing it over and over again. But the spotlight on antiwar.com today is by Ted Rall, and it's about the language law, how the first thing the new junta did in Ukraine was repeal a law that recognized Russian as an official language of the provinces or the districts or whatever where they have a majority Russian language speaking population. And Ted Rall says, hey, maybe this has never happened to you in your society, so you don't see why they would take it that hard. But let me tell you, the way he says, when the Soviet Union broke apart, millions of Russians were left, quote unquote, behind the lines, ethnic Russians, behind the lines of these other states, including the stands and etc. And he talks about, specifically talks about the history of Kazakhstan, where they delegitimized the Russian language, and then they delegitimized Russian work permits, and then they completely reduced them from, the rulers of society to the ghettoized dregs, and eventually, remove them from all political power and all any kind of anything. And it was a really bad deal, and many of them died, I guess. There were pogroms and whatever. It's been a major problem in the former Soviet Union for ethnic Russians stuck behind the lines. And as Ted Rall puts it over and over again, and he tells the story there, again, it's the spotlight today on antiwar.com. He tells the story how over and over again, the first thing they do is they outlaw Russian, or they delegitimize the Russian language, and then they move on. And now in Ukraine, it's a super majority Russian-speaking place because it's a sad legacy, really, of the Soviet Union, of what the Russians did there before, was they completely marginalized. This would be the reverse of that. What the communists did was marginalizing Ukrainian, and they made it now where. And I guess this is a little bit different regionally, but mostly I think it's the city folks speak Russian and only the country bumpkins, and even then only and I don't mean bumpkins, but rural folk, and only in the West really speak Ukrainian at all anymore. My wife, for example, she has an aunt who speaks Ukrainian, but most of them, and can read it, but most of the rest of her family can only speak Russian and read Russian. It's been that way for a long time. So you can see, though, why that would be such a big deal. Imagine some foreign power doing a putsch in your state and then outlawing your language. And you've seen this thing before when it happened to others. And man, I didn't get to talk about the CIA thing. Hey, y'all, Scott here. First, I want to take a second to thank all the show's listeners, sponsors, and supporters for helping make this show what it is. I literally couldn't do it without you. And now I want to tell you about the newest way to help support the show. Whenever you shop at Amazon.com, stop by ScottHorton.org first, and just click the Amazon logo on the right side of the page. That way, the show will get a kickback from Amazon's end of the sale. It won't cost you an extra cent. And it's not just books. Amazon.com sells just about everything in the world, except cars, I think. So whatever you need, they've got it. Just click the Amazon logo on the right side of the page at ScottHorton.org, or go to ScottHorton.org/Amazon. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson is a successful former hedge fund manager who provides his subscribers with a very real window into his investments, updating them on every move he makes in the markets. Right now, Mike's anticipating a bear and is dumping all his stocks while the getting is good, investing instead in gold and the commodities. Protect your assets and learn the wise ways of the markets. WallStreetWindow.com. And check out Mike Swanson's great contribution to the history of the rise of the American Empire and the War State. Available at ScottHorton.org/Amazon. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. And our first guest up today is MJ Rosenberg. He's formerly, I know you hate it when I say this, MJ, but it's relevant. He's formerly a staffer with the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, although that was a long, long time ago. He would hasten to have me hasten to add. But now he's a peace activist kind of a guy. He writes at the Huffington Post. And I don't know, what happened to your website? It looks like it's gone, mjrosenberg.com. Is that right,
Yeah,
MJ?
I took it down. I have my own list, which goes out to thousands of people, and I prefer to sell my stuff that way. And I have a Huffington Post. I mean, it goes out to Huffington Post and Washington Spectator and Tikkun. So I need my own website. Nobody went to read my stuff at the website. They always looked at other places.
There you go. Okay, well, yeah, certainly I always look at Huffington Post for the latest. And this will be an issue later on in the interview. I want to talk about your latest there about the BDS movement.
Okay.
Very interesting article to me. But first of all, let's see what kind of coverage we can get about the American Israel Public Affairs Committee meeting this week in Washington, D.C. What are the highlights so far? I guess Benjamin Netanyahu has spoken.
It's over. I mean, it ended already.
Oh, is it over?
Yeah, and they saved the big moment, his speech for the end. And the very last thing following his speech is sort of like gives the AIPAC delegates their marching orders, and then they go up to Capitol Hill. It was interesting. We had snow yesterday when the conference was ending, and the people were going up to the hill. And it was on all the weather reports. They kept saying, there's a big tie-up around the Washington Convention Center. Avoid that area, because there are 14,000 people come in for that thing. And they all take cabs and buses from the convention center to go up to the hill. But they basically tie up the whole city. I mean, that's I'm not objecting to that, but it's a big deal. That they fill up the entire Washington Conference Center, which is incredible.
Well, wait, so you're saying when the AIPAC conference is over, everybody goes over to Capitol Hill?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose people who are, disabled don't go.
But you're saying pretty much, though.
Yeah, they have meetings scheduled with every single congressional office. I was talking to a friend about who works on Capitol Hill, works for a senator, and I said, AIPAC is up there. So I said, yeah, is that your second worst day of the year? Because I worked on Capitol Hill for 15 years. So he said, second worst. What's the worst? So I said, well, when all the right to lifers go up on January 20th, and they all march with their red roses about the unborn and all that, and they have even more people than AIPAC. He said, I don't know. They're nothing like AIPAC. He said, one, they don't demand to see the congressman themselves. They're happy with staff. Two, if they have a staffer, they don't demand a higher staffer. And three, they don't give us orders. They're polite. They let us make our points. They make their points. And he says an entirely different thing. No, I can't. He said, I can't stand them, but I'll take them any day. They don't come up and boss us around like they own us. Which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, so what is the worst day then if it's not this one?
The worst day is the worst day is the worst day is the AIPAC one. I thought it was the second worst after the right to lifers, and he said absolutely not. These people, the right to lifers don't act like they're entitled.
I thought you were going to say, no, it's another event that's also hosted by AIPAC, or maybe when the Christians United for Israel come, or something like that.
Well, yeah, I don't know about that, but this is just one office. But I remember when I was up there, it was awful when they'd come in, because they demand they demand to see the senator or congressman. I've known them to just walk into meetings where the doors are closed. I mean, nobody does that. I mean, but I guess they think it's their Congress. They paid for it, so, hey, what can you do?
Yeah, the senators, they're just the help.
Exactly.
That's funny. Well, I mean, that's really something else. I guess it's funny because, I'm a libertarian, so I'm not much into democracy, because what right does 51% have to boss me around on any issue, really?
Okay.
But it comes down to it, I kind of admire the organization and the stick-to-itiveness and the ability to simply work within the system. And that's not to say that they don't work around the system, because they do, but that's the Grant Smith interview coming up next. But for our purposes, the Israel lobby, AIPAC, and their associated groups, they play the game of democracy so well. I mean, the way you described, they're so arrogant, it probably backfires on them at least a little bit. But when it comes down to making sure that they have somebody there to push a congressman or his staffer or whoever on each and every issue, they've got it covered. They've got somebody there. When the word goes out that everybody call everyone on your telephone tree, and everyone email everyone on your email list, and everyone who gets an email actually do the thing that it's telling you to do. Send the letter, make the phone call, do the thing. They do it, and they get it done. They're better than the AARP. They're better than the gun lobby. They're better than anyone at going up there and just making sure. Oh, and the one other thing would be, if you cross them, if you're a congressman and you cross them, they will guarantee bankroll your primary challenger. And if you beat him, then they'll bankroll your general election challenger. And if you beat him, then they'll see you in 2 years, you SOB, and they're not going to forget.
Yeah, it's all very working within the democratic system and all that.
But it's hardball, man. They play hardball bad.
It's hardball, but the difference between the AARP and the NRA and the other ones that you mentioned is they're doing it at the orders of and for a foreign government.
Ah, well, there's the rub.
There has to be something, and that's it. There is no other lobby for a foreign government that's like that. Not even. I mean, I can't even. I mean, nothing close.
But what if we had a peace lobby like that, where everybody who was anti-war, no matter what we hate about each other on any other issue, we just always work together on anti-war, and we're hardcore like this, and we're all on one big email list like this, and that kind of thing.
It would be great. It would be great. That's a dream.
It's my ultimate fantasy to have that for just it's the 300 million of us versus DC, and the 300 million of us say none of this, no more.
Yeah, exactly. But that it's not going to happen. I mean, it might happen, but you're younger than me. Maybe
we need to get the Canadians to bankroll it, or the I don't know, the Brazilians or somebody. I don't know.
It's certainly not the Canadians. They're even further to the right than we are these days.
Oh yeah. Maybe I should get you started on that.
Yeah.
Well, you want to comment a little bit more about that? Because I don't pay much attention. I know they have a right winger in power now, but I don't know much about him.
Oh well, on war peace issues, they're crazy. He's not just a right winger. He's a religious fundamentalist, which I didn't even know they had those up there. And he's crazy on the subject of Israel. He recently he went over to the Canadian Prime Minister, went over there and gave a speech that would shame an American president. It was just ridiculous. So, I mean, I'm not going to hold that against all Canadians, but still,
yeah.
There are fewer countries for us to run and hide to when the time comes.
Yeah.
All in all, though, Canada is better on most things. But I wanted to say about the AIPAC conference, I think they would have been better off had they not had it been canceled because of the snow. I bet they were sitting there watching the weather reports and hoping they had an excuse to cancel. Because what happened was, they beat Obama on the Iran sanctions thing. When Obama said, "I'll veto the bill," more sanctions, which would destroy the negotiations. AIPAC lost, and the Democrats all abandoned the AIPAC bill, and then AIPAC abandoned the AIPAC bill, and amazingly said, well, it was a Republican bill, and we're bipartisan, which is so ridiculous. They wrote the bill. The Republicans didn't write the bill. But anyway, they abandoned the whole thing. So, man, they were hurting. They had lost big time. So the point of this conference should have been that they could show, we're here, we're strong. But it didn't. Obama scared them so much that it was just, there are two speakers from the administration, the Secretary of State, who in their eyes is all evil because he's the one behind this Iran negotiation. But they applauded him and cheered him, even though privately they were seething. But they had been told no booing, none of that. And they had this Secretary of Treasury, Jacob Lew, there. He defended, of course, his own administration. They sat there and applauded and did all that. Mm-hmm. There was no saber rattling at Obama at all because they now know he fights back. He doesn't like them. He doesn't like them. He doesn't like their prime minister either. So they're scared of him. And he said that, those words in the State of the Union speech in which he said, I will veto Iran, AIPAC's Iran sanctions bill because it's against our national security. That scared them. I mean, he was all of a sudden saying, which side are you on? Yeah. So they were so at their conference where, they could have either fought back hard or kind of rolled over, they rolled over again. And then it ended with Netanyahu giving a speech. The Netanyahu speech is kind of a classic. It's his usual stuff that the Iranians are the worst people in the world and that they're going to lob nuclear weapons at Israel and we're all going to die and all this stuff. But he said it jokingly this time. He made jokes about it, like he was kidding. Like, we all know I'm going to say this. I forgot he said, he said the Iranians are going to start shooting Scud missiles at the United States. And then he said, it used to be just a threat for us, but now they're going to be a threat to you, too. And he said, the phrase, this Spuds for you? Well, America, it's going to be this Scuds for you. Ha ha ha. Everybody laughed.
Are you kidding me? Scuds he threatened us with. I hadn't realized that continental drift had sped up by 100 million%.
Yeah, he didn't threaten it. He just was making a joke. Yeah. But the very fact that he was joking about it, it was, usually it's like gloom and doom. It's 1942, and it's to be the end, and Hitler's taken over again. He kind of said all of it, but his heart wasn't in it. Yeah. And then he spent 25% of the speech. I know that because I counted. 25% of the speech denouncing the BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, and said how it's terrible and anti-Semitic, and college students should avoid it like the plague. And as I wrote in my piece in Huffington Post, I thought it would be like Lyndon Johnson in the middle of the Vietnam War giving a major speech and attacking SDS. The left. It's just like, why are you attacking BDS? I understand you don't like it. I don't like it either. But the point is, that's not your problem. Your problem is the damn occupation. And that's why you got a problem. And your problem is you tried to get the United States into a war with Iran. That's your problem.
Right. Now,
and what a diversion that is. Oh, blame it on college students and activists who, right or wrong, favor boycotting and divestment and sanctions on Israel. And that's the way the speech ended. It ended with all that, and they gave a standing ovation, and it was a big nothing.
Yeah, it sounds just like a big nothing. Now hold it right there. We got to take this break. We'll be right back with MJ Rosenberg right now at the Huffington Post. We'll be right back after this. Hey y'all, Scott Horton here for CashIntoCoins.com. So you want to buy some Bitcoins? CashIntoCoins.com makes it fast, easy, and safe to get Bitcoins. Just deposit the money into their account at any of the major banks they support, and then just email them a picture of the receipt and your Bitcoin address, and you get your Bitcoins. Almost always the same day it clears. In a tough, competitive new market, CashIntoCoins.com has the advantage. A great system and great customer service to keep you coming back. That's CashIntoCoins.com. Just click the link in the right margin at ScottHorton.org. Don't worry about things you can't control. Isn't that what they always say? But it's about impossible to avoid worrying about what's going on these days. The government has used the war on guns, the war on drugs, and the war on terrorism to tear our Bill of Rights to shreds. But you can fight back. The 10th Amendment Center has proven it, racking up major victories. For example, when the U.S. government claimed authority in the NDAA to have the military kidnap and detain Americans without trial, the nullifiers got a law passed in California, declaring the state's refusal to ever participate in any such thing. Their latest project is offnow.org, nullifying the National Security Agency. They've already gotten model legislation introduced in California, Arizona, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Kansas, meant to limit the power of the NSA to spy on Americans in those states. We'd be fools to wait around for the U.S. Congress or courts to roll back Big Brother. Our best chance is nullification and interposition on the state level. Go to offnow.org, print out that model legislation, and get to work nullifying the NSA. The hero Edward Snowden has risked everything to give us this chance. Let's take it. Offnow.org. All right, guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. I'm talking with MJ Rosenberg about the big AIPAC meeting in Washington, D.C., and Netanyahu's speech, and then, of course, policies. The ones in question, of course, Palestine, Iran, also Syria, of course. Let me ask you this before we get back into it.
MJ, are you aware of and or are you going to the National Summit to reassess the U.S.-Israel special relationship this Friday at the National Press Club?
I am aware of it, and I'm not going because I'm too old for these meetings. I don't do it anymore.
Oh, okay.
I don't go to anything. I sit in my house and write. That's what I do.
Well, that's good too. But
If I actually went somewhere, or if you probably did an advertisement for it, I'd probably go because your ads could convince me to buy anything.
Oh, you like those, huh?
I love them. I gotta tell you, I mean, I have a kid who's a big radio guy in New York.
Yeah.
And he's really good at selling stuff on the air. I always am amazed by how, because now on radio, of course, as you know, you pitch one thing after another. It's no longer between the music.
Right.
And I always, and you are the best. I know it has nothing to do with your show. You just obviously cut this out. But whenever I listen to you, I think, wow, if you advertised Walmart, I'd shop at Walmart.
Wow, that's pretty good. I actually have, I don't know if I got it queued up here, but I have a commercial for it. I'm actually giving the opening remarks
Really?
first thing in the morning. It's the whole thing is 8 to 5. And,
really?
And I'm
Holy
giving the
cow.
opening welcome everybody thing, and then I'm hosting one of the panels later in the afternoon. But it's going to be all of my guests who care about the Middle East at all are going to be there, man. A bunch of people.
Where is it?
It's
Where
at
is
the
it?
National Press Club.
At the National Press Club. And what would be the website for it?
It's natsummit.org.
Natsummit.org. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
And they got general, and they've got a former FBI agent or two. I think at least two. They're going to have a whole panel of former CIA guys, including Giraldi, Scheuer, and McGovern, and a couple others I forget. And Phil Weiss is going to be there, Justin Raimondo, Scott McConnell from the American Conservative Magazine, and Karen Katowski, the former lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, who
she's
saw
the
the
best.
neocons lice into war from her seat at the Pentagon. And Stephen Walt from Harvard is going to be there. And so, yeah, man, it's going to be cool.
And you're the like the moderator?
No, just I'm giving the opening talk and I'm moderating one of the panels.
Okay, I'm looking for your picture here.
Oh, am I on there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it is everybody speaking. There must be an alphabet. I don't know where you are on this, but you're obviously
Well, I'm
here.
not really giving a talk. I'm just going to, I'm a little bit of window dressing, but that's
I
all
see.
right.
Yeah, wow.
But
It's
Raimondo
sure
from
the
antiwar.com.
greats and the near greats of the movement are there. That's for sure.
Say what
Now,
now?
when you do it in the National Press Club, how many people does it hold?
I don't know, but it's going to be packed, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess depending on the weather, but.
Yeah, right. Oh, Mark Perry's going to be there, too. I like him a lot.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, what were we talking about?
You showing up there so we can shake hands in person. That'd be great.
Yeah. Okay. I don't even know what you look like. If you're a radio guy, I'd rather not. Because this way I have this image of you in my mind,
Oh, there you go.
know?
Yeah, no, I'm very handsome and tall.
Oh, I'm sure you
Very
are.
broad shoulders.
Oh, no kidding. Well, that's kind of exciting. I might want to, I need a bodyguard. Yeah, I'm going to look into it.
All right, cool. All right, so now, well, geez, let me ask you this about the Israel lobby. So they had 3 pretty big losses in the last year. They lost over Hagel, although not that he was great, but at least they were against him and lost on that issue. He became a sec def anyway. And then they lost on Syria last fall. I almost think that Obama deliberately asked them to help on Syria and then left them hanging out to dry, that he already was working on that deal with the Russians to get rid of the chemicals instead, and that he just
Well, he
wanted
was
to weaken
already
them one
working
more
on
peg.
the Iran stuff at that point, and he wasn't telling the Israelis about it.
Right. And then,
So,
yeah,
he might. That's a good point.
Iran next. I'm not certain of that. I just sort of suspect, but I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
And then, so now then, as you said, Obama, and I think it took this, really. It took him mentioning it in the State of the Union speech that, listen, you better not do these sanctions. I mean it.
Right.
For them to lose on that one. But that's a pretty severe smackdown from the President of the United States. And there's been a few different articles about how, there's some people in the Israel lobby, I guess mostly those who lean more Democrat, who are saying, man, we really want to be opposite the President of the United States on such an important issue, even if that's, even if he disagrees with Netanyahu on this. I mean, we are Americans after all, right? Kind of, there's a little bit of dissonance going on there finally, I think. And I just wonder whether you think that means that the fight over the final deal will be a little bit less than
what we might have expected prior. You know, I see Josh Block and some of the other guys on Twitter talking about how no enrichment, but
right, exactly.
What do you think?
I think that they're hoping that the Republicans take over the Senate this year, and they think that that'll help them a little bit. But the only thing that really help.
I mean, this deal's going to be April or bust, right?
Yeah, right. And looking toward the future, I could see it's very easy to see a Republican Senate this year, or a fully Republican Congress. But it's really hard to imagine a Republican president. And it's presidents that present them with their problem. It's presidents who make State of the Unions. It's presidents who ultimately make foreign policy, not Congress. And so they've got to think, if they're going to have the Democrats around for the foreseeable future, could be the end of the lobby. I mean, I don't want to get too optimistic. But even Hillary Clinton, who I think is the most likely Democrat, presidents only like to get pushed around so far. They are, God, Obama. I was thinking about how at the conference, at the APEC conference, everyone was denouncing Obama for being weak on Ukraine. Mm-hmm. They're going on and on. He, privately, he's spineless. And also in the panel discussions, he's spineless. He doesn't stand up for anything. And I thought, yeah, but he sure stood up to you, didn't he? I mean, that's it's interesting that he of all people would have picked this fight. But he did, and he showed you can win.
Interesting to me that Israeli nationalists would side with Ukrainian nationalists when they're outright parading around with SS lightning bolts on their posters.
They don't care about that, though.
There is such a thing as too far, right, guys?
It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I was talking with Sheldon Richmond, and we agreed that anybody parading around with SS lightning bolts is not concerned that you might mistake them for a Nazi. That's a Nazi.
Right.
Unless it's Halloween and maybe he's, British royalty or something. But otherwise, they're pretty much.
It's pretty hilarious, though. How we're being so indoctrinated here on this Ukraine business. It's like you put the television on and it's 1971 and it's the Cold War and you want to say, wait a minute, this is Russia, but there is no more Soviet Union. Why do you talk as if it's the Soviet Union and we're in this zero-sum battle with them? They so obviously missed the bipolar world,
right?
And it's just crazy. It's just to listen to John McCain. That man is nuts, absolutely nuts. I mean, it's amazing. We're lucky that Obama is in there now. I think because I don't think he's going to do as hawkish as he can be. I don't think he'd do anything like what McCain or even Romney would do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly about Romney. I'm sure he'd be worse in this situation, but I'm positive that there's just no question, I don't think, MJ, that if McCain had won in 2008, that we would have all been dead in a war with Russia a long time ago.
Yeah,
he would have gotten us killed in 2009 or 10 in a thermonuclear exchange.
And I also agree with you that I don't think Romney's the same. I think Romney just, he talked that game to win the nomination and all that. But I don't think I don't think he's out of his mind. I think that McCain is
out of control.
Nuts.
Though. He is.
What?
McCain, I think, would have gotten us into war with Russia.
I absolutely agree. He's unbelievable. It's so ironic in a way. I guess because he has such a lousy military record, he doesn't have that kind of Eisenhower, Hagel. People who really saw combat. I don't want to be too mean to John McCain, but he spent the entire war when he wasn't in the POW camp, dropping bombs on civilians from way up in the air. He never really saw combat. So unlike the model of Grant, Eisenhower, Hagel, he thinks war's just terrific.
Yeah.
Looks pretty good when you're way up there,
Well, and he's got the W. Bush problem, too, that he's the son and the grandson of great men, and yet he's really kind of pathetic and always falls short, and everybody hates him. And so,
really, the guy's pushing 80. He really should get over it. On the other hand, he still has to impress his mother because he's got a mother who's 104. So
well, that's impressive. I'll give him credit for.
Yeah, that is. I don't give him credit for it. And the mother and his mom has a twin sister. and she's around too.
Oh, that's
which
amazing.
means John McCain should be in the Senate for another 30 years.
Yeah, boy, I hope he, his father's genes favor him more than his mother's on the longevity.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. Boy, oh boy, yeah, we could be in deep trouble with this guy. I keep thinking, won't he go away soon? But he just never goes away, man.
I know.
Bill Hicks said that Reagan was Jason under that hockey mask, but I think it's John McCain.
Oh, yeah.
Did I say Reagan? I said Jason, but Jason, yeah, I ruined that. God damn. Sorry, Bill's ghost. All right. Well, anyway, so now BDS, we don't even have time to talk about it, but I will recommend that people go and read your article at the Huffington Post about why you're against the
I'm against
sanctions
it
and investment
as it applies to all of Israel. I do favor all the things like the Presbyterians and others are doing, which is a divestment from any company that does business on in the West Bank or any occupied territory.
I'm sorry for goofing around so much that we didn't give a chance to give that.
I like goofing around with you. It's fun.
Anyway, thanks very much, MJ. It's great to talk to you again.
Same here. Bye-bye.
See ya. All right, everybody, that's the great MJ Rosenberg. He's at thehuffingtonpost.com/MJ-Rosenberg. That's pretty easy. We'll be right back. Man, you need some new stickers for the back of your truck. Scott Horton here for LibertyStickers.com. Aren't you sick and tired of everyone else being wrong about everything all the time? Well, now you can tell them all what's right with some stickers from LibertyStickers.com. At LibertyStickers.com, they're against everything, so you know they're good on your issue, too. Whether it's the wars, police, state, gun laws, the left and right, or the president, LibertyStickers.com has hundreds of choices so you can find just the right words to express your opposition and contempt for those who would violate your rights. That's LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. All right, you guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. Pat Buchanan's coming up in half an hour. Find out what he thinks about this Ukraine thing. He's a good old-fashioned cold warrior, right? Well, we'll see what he says. First, though, Grant Smith. He's the founder and the director of the Institute for Research Middle East Policy. That's IRMEP.com or .net or .org or something. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, great, Scott. It's .com, .org. You'll find it, IRMEP.
Yeah, it's there. It's com and org, everybody. And I'll tell you real briefly, what Grant does is he sues the government, not for money or damages, but for documents. And he shows the hidden history of the Israel lobby in the United States of America through official government paperwork. Primarily, I don't mean to sum it up too briefly, but that's, I'll tell you what, there's nothing like IRMEP.com for digging through primary source material about the activities of Israel's government in America over the last 2, 3, 4 generations. I mean it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a volume. In fact, we put a lot of effort into cataloging and putting up historic documents that have never seen the light of day, and whether it's how the first lobbying organizations were confronted and attempted regulation as foreign agents, to mishaps such as uranium smuggling and nuclear technology smuggling, to trade agreements that favored one side but not the other. It's all there, and it's being used by more and more people to really understand how the relationship really works between the U.S. and Israel, as opposed to kind of how it's explained in generalist sources.
Exactly. All right, so before we get into all that, because I want to get into all that, I know that's a lot of that is going to be the subject of your talk at this national summit, but what national summit?
Yeah, so there is a national summit that's happening Friday, all day at the National Press Club in the ballroom, which is an airplane hangar-like space, open to the public. And from 8 o'clock till 5 o'clock, there's going to be nothing but a series of experts talking about the special relationship between the United States and Israel. It just seemed the right time, and this conference has been planned for quite a while now, but it seemed like the right time given all the efforts that go into lobbying to support Israel militarily and the prerogatives that the lobbying organizations here have in the United States to put forward programs and lobby Congress for the biggest aid package delivered by the United States. It seemed like the right moment to gather a large group of experts from academia, former Congress people, people from government, people from the intelligence world, scholars, historians, and talk about the real cost-benefit and kind of basic way so that the press and people and interested parties can understand how it functions and see the costs and what happens as a result of that relationship. So, just to kind of summarize some of the speakers, former Congressman Paul Finley, who wrote one of the first books about the Israel lobby, Janet McMahon, who tracks political contributions, Cynthia McKinney, a congressperson who was forced out, one of two African-American congresspeople forced out by lobbying activities, Delinda Hanley, who follows aid to Israel, to talk about how much we're actually spending, as well as experts talking about neoconservatives in the Iraq War, what was going on inside the Pentagon. Gareth Porter, someone you interview a lot, coming in to talk about the continual drive for U.S. Israel military actions against Iran and whether there's any substance behind that. Brigadier General James David, who's going to talk about military aid and how it impacts other allies. I'll have an interesting panel on the special relationship and rule of law. As we've talked about many times, it's my fundamental position that the lobby and its activities in the U.S. have typically transcended law. There are no laws that are well enough enforced to actually impact its operations. But we'll also have Mark Perry talking about what he's seen as a national security reporter, and M.E. Spike Bowman, who is a counterintelligence guy at the FBI, who's written about Jonathan Pollard, to talk about what it all means. And hopefully he'll talk about whether Jonathan Pollard is kind of the exception to the rule, which is stated by Pollard, is that the U.S. doesn't and shouldn't ever prosecute Israeli espionage. So that should be an interesting panel. But we've also got historic panels. Stephen Walt, who wrote The Israel Lobbies, coming in to talk about what's changed since he wrote that book with John Mearsheimer. Jeffrey Warrow, who's talking about his book Quicksand, and also what happened to him as a historian who wrote kind of an unpopular revision of Middle East history. John Quigley talking about the ongoing impact of 1967 and Israel's occupation and U.S. support for it. And so it's a series of panels, including a final panel on intelligence, in which Michael Scheuer, Paul Pillar, Ray McGovern, and Philip Giraldi, again, people that you know and interview, are going to answer a series of questions about this alliance, whether it's truly an alliance and whether the United States is benefiting or suffering from blowback. There's a really interesting panel, number 5, that we've got a star mediator for, the moderator, rather, who's going to talk about the lobby and political parties in the news media, and that's one famous radio announcer called Scott Horton. So this whole thing is just an unprecedented national gathering with hundreds and hundreds of people already signed up who are going to talk about reality as opposed to myth and legend and what normally passes for a discussion of this issue in Washington.
Right. I mean, that's the most striking thing about all of this, is how unprecedented it is. Guess what, everybody? At the National Press Club in D.C., there's going to be an honest discussion of the costs and consequences of America's pseudo-alliance with Israel. The one that everybody called you Klansmen for mentioning just before a couple of years ago is completely outside of polite discussion, somehow at least, between New York and D.C. to even talk about this kind of thing. Of course, the Mearsheimer-Walt book did a lot to change that, and of course the Iraq War did a lot to change that.
Right. I just think that the key driver, though, for a lot of people is here the Israel lobby's number one priority is getting the U.S. to really completely isolate and at some point attack Iran for what we all know are entirely specious reasons. And so it's really timely to look at the infrastructure that's behind that and really take it apart from the perspective of not a regional, not an economic, or not entirely economic, but really from the standpoint of, if the United States is supposed to be pursuing its own interests, is this in the U.S. interest or not? And so, the panels have been constructed around a series of questions, and we've reached out to a lot of people to be on those panels. It's not the broadest perspective. I mean, there are certainly things that have been left out, but in terms of learning something about how this special relationship develops, and when it's stripped of all of the publicity, what it really stands for, and what kind of facts on the ground here in the United States it creates, this is it. This is what's going to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Fitzy in the chat room is just saying, because we just finished talking with MJ Rosenberg, that right now they really are back on their heels after these 3 big losses, and Obama himself shouting them down in the State of the Union address on the Iran sanctions, and kind of splits and faction fights, really between liberal and conservative, I guess, even within the Israel lobby and that kind of thing. So this is perfect timing, right as they're up to their very worst activity, trying to undermine our peace deal with Iran, which is what the nuclear deal ultimately is, the resolution of the biggest outstanding so-called issue anyway. And right in the middle of them being weak and up to their worst comes Grant Smith and Phil Giraldi in this national summit to make it clear, and on C-SPAN for everyone to see, what are the other consequences? Now that we're looking at this with open eyes about what we're really dealing with here, what have we been missing over the last few years that they didn't talk about back when you couldn't talk about it,
Exactly. I think the interesting thing is there's not a single person who's going to be on any of these panels who's afraid to break what's probably the number one taboo in the news media and in politics. And that is to be frank about the fact that Israel is a nuclear weapons state.
Right.
It engaged in a lot of illegal activities to become that way. And it's absolutely ridiculous to talk about Iran or even the region without being very honest about the fact that they have an overwhelming strategic advantage over everybody.
All right, we'll be right back with Grant Smith after this.
On March 7th at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., the Council for the National Interest is co-hosting the first ever national summit to reassess the U.S.-Israel special relationship. Confirmed speakers include Walt, Scheuer, Giraldi, McGovern, Katowski, Porter, McConnell, Weiss, Raimondo, USS Liberty survivor Ernie Gallo, as well as co-sponsors Alison Ware of If Americans Knew and the great Grant Smith of the Institute for Research, Middle East Policy. That's the national summit to reassess the U.S.-Israel special relationship. Friday, March the 7th, all day at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. natsummit.org.
All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. I'm talking with Grant F. Smith from the Institute for Research Middle East Policy. That's IRMEP.org, IRMEP.com, IRMEP, and natsummit.org, where his group and Phil Giraldi's group, the Council for the National Interest, are putting on the National Summit to reassess the America-Israel special relationship this Friday, all day, 8 to 5, at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Get there early and see me say hi for a minute and introduce the thing. And then later in the day, I'll be hosting a panel, too. If everything else he said wasn't enough to convince you to show up, I'm going to be there. Okay, great.
Yeah, there's the bonus. And there are also 2 other sponsors. One is the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs.
Oh, yeah.
And the other is If Americans Knew. And,
right.
It should be a really interesting time to just...
Now, wait a minute, because I wasn't done introducing you again, even though I was kind of blabbing all over the place, but I still got to tell the people that you're the author of Divert, NUMEC, Zalman Shapiro, and the diversion of U.S. weapons-grade uranium into the Israeli nuclear weapons program. Available at all your fine booksellers online and in real life. I'm sorry, what?
Well, I think it's interesting because the core story in Divert is something that's going to come up in presentation. Military.com, in fact, just ran a piece noting the irony that at the same time that AIPAC was meeting to talk about further ways to go after Iran's non-existent nuclear weapons program, you had Arnaud Milchan on stage getting an Oscar award This is an admitted, self-confessed spy who targeted the United States for nuclear technologies. And on the East Coast, you had Benjamin Netanyahu, who worked with Milchan and Richard Kelly Smith, addressing AIPAC and talking about the dangers of proliferation. So here you've got two proliferators. And the funny story is they're going to be meeting in California. It'll be kind of like a reunion for the two. Who knows? Maybe to rehash old times and talk about maybe new technologies they'd like to spirit out of the United States illegally. The irony of real proliferators being able to so completely get away with that sort of activity, and most Americans aren't even aware of it. That's just a prime case study for how bad things have gotten. And unfortunately, it's kind of a repeat of history. You know, the United States and Israel got off on a bad foot back in the 40s because the first thing that the government in waiting did was come over to the United States and put together a giant conventional arms smuggling network. And so things, because nothing has ever been done and because the awareness level is so low, that sort of thing just continues. It perpetuates. There's really almost a reflexive idea that this is an open market and that the laws really don't apply to this relationship. And it's hurting the United States.
All right, now, I want to ask you about some of the history of this, because you've written a great many books besides Divert, but as long as you mention it, can you be a bit more specific about the role of the current Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in this nuclear smuggling ring?
Well, he was...
we have covered this on the show before if people want to go back and look at scotthorton.org, by the way.
Yeah, the FBI released reports from one of the front companies that was rolled up in the United States called Heli Trading Company. And it turned out that when the leader of that company was put against the wall in 2002, after he had been extradited from Spain after he fled prosecution in the United States, he said quite clearly that Benjamin Netanyahu was the one he was meeting with in Israel in the 70s and 80s to procure nuclear weapons technology. And he also was the guy who did time for that. Milchan, who was his handler, who recruited him, Arnon Milchan, a Hollywood producer, and Netanyahu, of course, skated free. They're too connected. They're not the types of people the FBI and Justice Department are interested in, frankly. You see in the FBI file that the first thing they did was look at who's who in America and discover that Milchan was one of those people that they probably wouldn't prevail against. And the reason this is history, and the reason why it's history repeating itself, is the exact same thing happened 30 years earlier when high-profile people, friends of the president, people who were bundling campaign contributions, were also upset at the prospect that conventional weapons smugglers might be called to the carpet and prosecuted for shipping tons and tons of material to Israel, basically subverting U.S. foreign policy to create a foreign state, basically taking advice and consent governance and taking that away from the rest of America through their own military policy. So what we see here is a corruption that is so deep and so embedded and so entrenched.
You know what, though? Let me ask you this. I mean, so entrenched. I mean, the fact of the matter is, as Anthony Gregory says, Barack Obama is the only real trillionaire around here. And the state, it's the state. And as big as any billionaire is, or foreign state, I mean, we're talking about the USA here, that ultimately the DOJ is always the bigger foot to stomp, if I could say it that way. They nail people, not all the time. You know, I understand that the who's who have a leg up on the rest of us, legally speaking and everything. But there are times where the Justice Department will, in fact, nail very powerful people to the wall just to prove that they can and that they still are boss around here and that kind of thing. But you're talking about the Israel lobby getting away with bloody murder here for decades with virtually no accountability. Am I overstating it?
You're not overstating it. I mean, yeah, of course, they'll make an example out of this person or that person. But what you see, and the reason why we ask for these documents, and we're still collecting these documents because, for example, we still don't have internal Justice Department decisions on the decision to quash the 2005 AIPAC espionage case. We don't have all the files on Nozet, who was stealing secrets for Israeli aircraft industries right up until 2008. But what we see in the previous releases is that there's always a meeting between the Attorney General and a group of lobbyists or Israelis in which the investigation comes to a complete halt and everything's wrapped up, classified, and packed away, and the next answers to the press is no comment. And this is for things that are very harmful to the United States. One of the investigations that we talk about is a counter-espionage investigation about a circumstance in which an American and a South African anti-apartheid activist died in mysterious circumstances. And yet the case going after the classified documents in that case held by the ADL, which is a branch of the Israel lobby, it was quashed. Why? Because of due process? No. Because of, again, this access and this embedded corruption. So it's because it repeats over and over and over again. It's always the same story, malicious activity, real harm, investigation launched, sometimes with press, sometimes without it, investigation terminated. I mean, that's the pattern. Rinse, wash, and repeat.
Yeah, well, and it's not just them. I mean, I don't mean to imply that, the rule of law is always applied to the rich and powerful around here or something, too naive. But it is amazing to me how much they get away with. I mean, even when you saw the real pushback, I guess, over the Iraq War politically, where they clamped down on the Larry Franklin, Stephen Rose, and Keith Weissman document laundering and all of that, they still let them get away with it. And that was really a first, that, 2 FBI raids on AIPAC headquarters or something like that. It was dramatic for the silence surrounding it on all sides in a way,
Well, you're right, the raids were a first, but the FBI's investigation of AIPAC, it was the third time. The first time being when one of their directors stole missile secrets in order to promote an Israeli plan in the region. The second was when they stole the trade secrets of 77 American corporations lobbying against a lopsided trade deal.
But even that was just in the 80s, right?
That was in the 80s. So, yeah, so it's like every 10 years you've got the FBI having to, get its lantern-jawed agents to crash into a door and look at what the documents are saying, and then, of course, terminate the investigation.
I didn't realize that they had ever done, raids, that it had ever gone that far before.
No, you're right about the raids, but, they have showed up before and gotten the documents. So, yeah. In this case, you're right, raids, hard drives seized. It was apparently scary enough for them to arm a full-scale defense. And what you can see in a lot of the court documents when Steve Rosen later filed a defamation suit is they had a massive PR campaign ready on deck to go after the FBI if at the drop of a hat if they weren't able to get the case quashed. So, but again, it doesn't make any sense when you look at the fact that we have an organization like AIPAC, which was the lobbying division of another organization that was ordered to register as a foreign agent and be open in the fact that it was a front for Israeli government priorities of the United States. The reason it exists is that when its mothership was ordered to register, it simply split off 6 weeks later and continued the operations. We have absolutely no real accountability and no enforcement for any of these organizations that are trying to, again, get us into wars. I think the biggest historical analogy here is the reason that there was an intense investigation of these groups in the 60s leading to Foreign Agent Registration Act orders was they were right after the Senate Foreign Relations Committee studied and discussed the Lavon affair, which was an attempt to get the U.S. to attack Egypt. Well, here we are decades later. The same organizations are trying to get us to attack Iran, and we haven't learned anything. The laws that could enforce transparency and allow Americans to see who's behind all of this haven't been enforced. And we're basically on the Mebius strip of fatal foreign policies that are really a result of inaction and our failure in governance here at home.
All right, everybody. That is the great Grant Smith from IRMEP.org, IRMEP.org, and natsummit.com, natsummit.com, or is that .org too? Anyway, it's the National Summit about America and Israel this Friday at the National Press Club. Thanks, Grant.
Hey, see you Friday.
Hey, all, Scott Horton here for the BumperSticker.com. I created it but quickly sold to Rick so I could do this instead. In the decades since, he's made one hell of a great company. The BumperSticker.com makes digitally printed, photo-quality, full-color bumper stickers for your band or your business, as well as magnets, adhesive vinyl decals, and labels for products and industrial use, and your political cause or campaign, too. The BumperSticker.com also offers full custom graphic design for bringing your idea to reality. Let the BumperSticker.com help you get the word out. That's the BumperSticker.com at the BumperSticker.com. And tell them you heard it here. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. Our next guest is a former speechwriter for Richard Nixon and for Ronald Reagan, and I don't know all the different positions that he's had. You know him from the McLaughlin Group, and, of course, his column at original.antiwar.com/Pat. And I think it's patrickjbuchanan.com as well. You can oftentimes read him at LouRockwell.com. Political commentator Pat Buchanan. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Doing fine, Scott.
Good. Very happy to have you here. And I'll be interested to hear your take on this Ukraine-Russia crisis going on here. You're a reliable right-wing old Cold Warrior, so I'm sure you're going to have some really harsh things to say about the Russians here and how they're out of line and how America needs to put them back in line, right? Nobody could possibly be as hard on the Russians as Pat Buchanan. So let him have it.
Well, the Soviets and the Bolsheviks are different than Russians, in my judgment, and what we have here in Crimea, for example, I think is simply a preemptive move by Vladimir Putin, who saw his political, diplomatic, and economic interests suddenly evaporate in Kiev, make a preemptive move to make sure he did not lose his security interests in the Black Sea. And the Crimea, of course, is the base of the Black Sea Fleet of Russia, the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and it's belonged to Russia, or was controlled by Russia, for some 200 years. And what he did is not at all irrational. It's quite what great powers do. And I know the Wall Street Journal called it a blitzkrieg, but as of thus far, I haven't seen lots of soldiers slaughtered.
Yeah, I saw some warning shots fired, but I don't know if there's even been reports of any killed, although I guess that could happen at any time if you have opposing armies nearby. But it was more or less a peaceful invasion, such as it was.
Right. They've got about, I think, 10,000 troops who are stationed on the Crimea, on the peninsula there, and they may have added more, and they're not under Russian insignia, and they've kept those off. And it has been a peaceful but forceful takeover, undeniably. But, Scott, look at the strategic situation. What strategic vital interest of the United States has been put at risk today? There's not a single new Russian ship in the port at Sebastopol. There is no greater threat than there was yesterday to any U.S. interest whatsoever. I think the U.S. The threat to the vital U.S. interest is absolutely zero.
Mm-hmm. Well, but what was the real threat to Russian interests in Crimea? You think the new government that, their basing rights there were really in question, for example?
Yeah, I do. I think the new government, I would be very leery if I were Putin, taking a look at a government which was replaced the duly elected legitimate government, incompetent and corrupt as it might have been, but it was replaced by people who were clearly anti-Russia, pro-West, and some of them understandably anti-Russian, because many of those areas in the western Ukraine and the central Ukraine suffered horribly in the Holodomor, the forced starvation and collectivization in 1932 and 33, which Kaganovich did for Stalin. So I understand that sentiment, but Putin looked over there and he sees these elements, and he says they're taking over the Ukraine, they're moving it out of our sphere of interest, and it's just a matter of a short time before they tell us they're canceling our lease on the Sebastopol naval base. So why don't we get in there and take control of that and make sure we have that. And so we bargain from a position of strength. So that's my belief as to what he's doing, Scott. And I will be surprised, and I think Putin will be taking a far graver risk if he moves troops into eastern Ukraine, basically the mainland of Ukraine and eastern Ukraine.
Now, well, I wonder what you think the chances of that are. It seems to me, and I'm an amateur at this compared to you for sure, but it seemed like the reason he had his soldiers, because they're clearly Russian soldiers, right? He had them tear their flags off their jackets because he wants to be able to pretend when he withdraws them later that, oh, that was just a local pro-Russian militia, so that he can save a little bit of face. He makes his statement, but he doesn't have to lose too much face in softening his position back again.
Well, right, and as we mentioned earlier, when the German army went into Poland, it didn't tear its insignias off. And I think what he wants to hear is, I think he's got a bargaining position that's fairly strong right now, but at the same time, he's got a problem on his own hands from this. This is why I think it's so silly to talk about any military operation on the part of the United States. As I say, we've got no vital interest there, no NATO ally, no commitment to use force at all. That I think that he is basically, he's lost Ukraine. He's lost an enormous asset, a strategic asset of Russia, I think, in his own backyard. And I think he realizes that. And there's no reason why we should go to war over something like that.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's incredible. I'm looking at antiwar.com/blog right now, and John Glazer has this YouGov poll where 14% of Americans answered that the U.S. has, quote, any responsibility to get involved in Ukraine. Never mind how involved we already are. But it's interesting to compare that to the tone of voice of every single person on every single cable TV news channel all day long on each and every one of them, other than that one Stephen Cohen from The Nation they interview from time to time on CNN. Otherwise, it's 100% unanimous. And apparently we're all... The media wants us to believe that we all are with them on this, but it's not. Doesn't seem to be working, Pat.
Yeah, and quite frankly, why is this America's responsibility? We are not only on the other side of the Black Sea, we're on the other side of the Mediterranean, and we're on the other side of the Atlantic. Now, with the British Empire in 1853 to 1856, they did fight in Crimea. They did fight at Balaclava. That's where the charge of the Light Brigade took place that Lord Tennyson wrote up so magnificently. But that has not ever been in any vital interest of the United States. Scott, take a look at the Cold War. Ike didn't do anything at the time of the Hungarian Revolution, which was in Central Europe. Reagan did what? When Solidarity was shut down on Moscow's orders, some of us said, please put the Warsaw regime in default. He refused to do it because the White House told me this will sink the German banks. Yet Kennedy just went to Berlin and gave a speech when they built the wall. I was with Richard Nixon in '68 in his apartment when he talked to Lyndon Johnson during the invasion of Czechoslovakia by the Warsaw Pact and 250,000 troops. LBJ said, cut me some slack. And Nixon didn't come down on him with both feet because both of them knew we're not going to do anything militarily. In other words, during the Cold War, when we faced, I believe, a genuine strategic and civilizational threat, some of the strongest presidents in Cold War history said America's vital interests stop at the Elbe River, not on the Dnieper River.
Right. Well, and there really was no question in the 1980s that if it had come to it, like in the TV movie, where the Russians really were driving all their tank divisions into Western Europe, Reagan would have gone to war over that. But that's how many miles west of where we're talking about?
Well, there are thousands of miles. And that's what gets me, as I noted in my column. People, these editorial writers are saying it's in the heart of Europe, okay? Now, wait a minute.
The heart of Eurasia,
my
maybe.
map is,
it's a big continent.
It's east of what we used to call Eastern Europe.
Oh, man. Well, and you know, for some of the younger listeners, could you describe very briefly the difference between the USSR and the Russian government today? And I don't just mean that they have a freer media and elections and that kind of thing,
well,
but in terms of the size and the power.
Sure. Strategically, the Soviet Union, the USSR, after World War II, was the center of an empire that included 10 colonies in Central and Eastern Europe. You've got Poland and Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Romania, Bulgaria, East Germany, Czechoslovakia. All of these were satellite states, and this part of Central Europe hosted 400,000 Soviet troops and tank armies. We had 300,000 men on the other side of the Elbe River. In Germany, we had them in Norway, we had them down in Turkey eventually. So the world was divided between the Soviet Empire, which was led by the Soviet Union, and the Sino-Soviet bloc in Asia, which was Mao Zedong's China, allied with the Soviet Union, and they overran Southeast Asia. This was extraordinary. They had bases in Cuba. They were trying to build bases in Nicaragua. They had Grenada. They had Angola. They had Mozambique. They got Ethiopia. It was a worldwide struggle. And this country stood strong and stood tough under leaders like Eisenhower and like Ronald Reagan. And we just held the line and avoided a major war with Russia. We came close a number of times. And so eventually, when I was in the White House, or right after I left the White House, suddenly you looked up and the Soviet Empire collapsed. They were tearing down the Berlin Wall. People were pouring out of Eastern Europe into the West. People in the West were walking across the border into these countries. All of them overthrew their communist governments. So you got 10 countries coming free. Then you saw the USSR, the Soviet Union, broke up into 15 separate nations. 15 nations. It came apart. And you got Ronald Reagan walking through Red Square, the fellow that called the Soviets the evil empire. 7 years later, he's walking through Red Square and being patted on the back by Russians. The war was over. The West had won. The America had led the West to victory. But when the war is over, we should have brought the troops home.
Okay, but now Pat, TV is saying, and very quickly, we have about a minute and a half before we have to take this break, but TV is saying, yeah, but Yeltsin, he was drunk and he was a pushover and this kind of thing. But this Putin, if he's not a new Stalin, he's a new Mussolini or something, and he's hardcore, man, and he wants to rebuild the Soviet Empire with this new Eurasian Union. Is that nothing?
No, but he does want a Eurasian Union, and what he wants is his version of NAFTA, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and the EU's got its economic union, and then you've got the Asian Economic Union. He wants to build an economic union of several of the old republics of the Soviet Union, but it is a voluntary union. It is an economic union. It is not a military alliance at all. NATO, quite frankly, which has 28 nations in it. We brought all those states of Eastern Europe into NATO. NATO is a military alliance. His Eurasian Union is an economic alliance. It's just like all these other groups that have gathered together in the post-Cold War era. They got them down Mercosur. They got one in Latin America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read Peter Beinart in The Atlantic has a very interesting piece out yesterday where, no, it's not American weakness that led to this, he writes, but he has a very detailed history about NATO expansion and talks, even about I forget the exact name for him, Pat, forgive me, but there's something like, NATO stand councils where they actually are normalizing the military forces of even all the stands along NATO lines, even though they're not outright allies yet. That's even further than I understood it.
Future war if you bring those states into NATO. For what is the purpose of NATO?
Right.
It's to contain
the
and
USSR.
control Russia.
All right, I'm sorry. I got to stop you there. We got to take this break. We'll be right back with the great Pat Buchanan right after this, everybody. Hey, y'all, Scott here. Ever wanted to help support the show and own silver at the same time? Well, a friend of mine, libertarian activist Arlo Pignati, has invented the alternative currency with the most promise of them all. QR Silver Commodity Discs. The first ever QR code 1-ounce silver pieces. Just scan the back of one with your phone and get the instant spot price. They're perfect for saving or spending at the market. And anyone who donates $100 or more to the Scott Horton Show at scotthorton.org/donate gets one. That's scotthorton.org/donate. And if you'd like to learn and order more, send them a message at commoditydiscs.com or check them out on Facebook at /commoditydiscs. And thanks. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. It's the Scott Horton Show. I'm him.
ScottHorton.org is the website, and you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at /Scott Horton Show. We're talking with Pat Buchanan, syndicated columnist. You can find him at antiwar.com, original.antiwar.com/Buchanan actually is the new address. In fact, I think antiwar.com/Pat will forward you on there. Tune out the war party, he writes, and Ukraine's crisis, not ours. Now, Pat, is that really true that it's not our crisis? What can you tell us about American intervention leading up to, for example, I guess, according to TV news, history began when the first Russian troops started coming across and landing in Crimea or leaving their bases in Crimea. What happened before that, or does it matter?
Well, what happened before that is that they had a negotiation between Mr. Putin's economic union, the Eurasian Union, or whatever he calls it, and the EU were both bidding to have Ukraine join them or move in their direction. Now, the European Union came in with a very cheesy offer. It was have the IMF come in and impose austerity, give them some loans, but give them no guarantee they are going to become a member of the European Union with all its benefits. So Putin sat down at the table and offered Kiev $15 billion in loans and concessionary terms on all their oil and gas. And so Yanukovych said, in effect, we got to go to the Russian offer. And Yanukovych is, of course, from eastern Ukraine, which is very pro-Russia. And so Putin won the battle, and what he saw then was the winning stakes were stolen from him. How? Groups came in first to protest the decision. They were from western and central Ukraine. Secondly, they've set up barricades, and then they brought in equipment to food and the rest of it. And then they began to battle police with sticks and then with Molotov cocktails. And then they burned down some buildings and occupied other public buildings and demanded concessions from Yanukovych, the president, who made one concession after another. He offered to bring the opposition into his government, and they kept pushing him till finally he broke, and they cut a deal, and he was not honored by the people in the streets, and Yanukovych he fled to Russia, and then the victors in that revolution went into the parliament, impeached him, and then they said Russian is no longer a second language. Now you're sitting up there in Moscow. What do you think when you see something like this going on? You're saying the West is behind this, the Americans with their National Endowment for Democracy, and all those agents they bring in here for these color-coded revolutions. They have to be behind this. And my guess is, Scott, now this is where you get into conjecture, my guess is he said, look, politically and diplomatically, we've temporarily lost the Ukraine, but we could lose our naval base and our strategic position in the Black Sea. Why don't we just secure it? And so send in these groups and do it in as non-obvious or non-provocative a way as we can, even though you can't really do that. Don't have them have any insignias on them, but take over all the key posts, grab the airfield so the Ukrainians can't land troops here, and simply take these places over. And that's what he did, and then we'll negotiate from a position of strength. That's what I think he did.
Yeah, it's funny how it seemed like the biggest piece of the coup was in broad daylight in all the papers, but it was in few places that anyone really put the cause and effect together, that it was the threat of sanctions against virtually, I guess, all of the billionaires, certainly any of the oligarchs of Ukraine who are supporting Yanukovych, that, listen, we're going to seize all of y'all's bank accounts. You better forsake this guy, 1-2. And they did. It wasn't the hippies, and they had the help of the brown shirts in the streets, I think, but it wasn't the hippies protesting out there that did this regime change. It was the threat of sanctions by the Western powers, pretty much 1-2, right?
Well, that's certainly involved in it. And there, and also, I'm not sure Mrs. Newland was right down there in the barricades, as of course with John McCain. And is this not direct interference in the internal affairs of Ukraine, trying to affect the overthrow of a legitimately elected government? The aura of hypocrisy around some American actions in recent years is astonishing. It's like the Cairo when the military took over, and they threw out the elected president of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Mohammed Morsi. I mean, John Kerry said all they were doing was restoring democracy. You know, I think Putin looks at this and he said, who do these guys think they're kidding?
Yeah, it's funny. The whole world was laughing at all of Kerry's statements about, hey, look, you don't just go around regime changing people. And just, there was 7 billion people laughing at once. It hurt my ears.
You know, you wonder why Putin says we went into Crimea because we suspect they've got weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah. By the way, you're the master of all this history, so I bet you that you know the answer to who are these Banderists? Does it matter the history of Bandera or however you say?
Stefan Bandera. Mm-hmm. Well, Stefan Bandera. This is interesting. Initially, when the Germans attacked the Soviet Union in June of 1941. They went late because they had to clean up something in the Balkans that Mussolini got him in trouble with. But they went late, and they swept into the Ukraine and in Russia, and they made enormous gains. And in the Baltic republics, which had been taken over by Stalin 2 years earlier, and when he was in alliance with Hitler, the people had been brutalized and murdered, and these very Catholic and Protestant countries, enormous suffering and murders. And that's why initially some of the Baltic peoples and the Ukrainians welcomed the Germans with open arms. But the Germans were deeply racist, and after a brief period of time, they found out that we've traded one ruler for another who is equally evil. But the Bandera and these folks fought on the side of the Germans, just like the Vlasov army did. He was a Vlasov. You'll Google that name and you'll find out the Soviets genuinely detest him. He led something like 2 million Russian prisoners of war against Stalin. Mm-hmm. He had been a hero of the Soviet Union.
Well, and then was betrayed by Truman, right?
Pardon?
And then was betrayed by Truman, right?
Oh, yeah. What we did is take a look at, Operation Keelhaul, mm-hmm. and there's another term for it as well, but Operation Keelhaul, we sent not only the Russian prisoners of war back to Stalin in certain death and brutalization, but even Cossacks and others who have fled Stalin had no role in the war. It's one of the great crimes of American history, and it's been obviously it's been swept under the rug in the quote good war. But that was horrible, and then in the end of the war, many of the peoples of the Germans especially, you had the greatest ethnic cleansing in history. 12 to 15 million Germans, from Prussia and from Brandenburg and from the Sudetenland, Bohemia, Moravia. All these people just herded out of there, and several million died. It was a horrendous thing. But to be honest, Scott, when you take a look at what's going on right now, this is tinker toys compared to what went on back in the 1940s.
Sure. Well, you can see, though, why the lines are so hard. I mean, you see how hard people fight over Republicans and Democrats here and call each other names like Nazi and commie, but over there they actually have these legacies. Their political parties actually do come from people who, for one reason or another, for one time or another, sided with the totalitarians.
Right, and there's a part of me that deeply sympathizes with the Ukrainians who dumped their government over. It's not that he was corrupt and the rest of it, but if they want to be free of Russian control, and they would like to be part of Central and Western Europe, and they would really like to say goodbye to the Russians, I mean, I can understand that. The point I make is, look, this is not America's war. This is not our, struggle. This is not our battle. I mean, one of Barack Obama's better lines was in Syria when he finally said, look, we're not going to get ourselves involved in somebody else's civil war.
Right. Well, what do you think is behind this push? Because, I mean, he was the one, or at least it's his government, that has gotten us involved in this, as you said, all of Newland's intervention and all of that kind of thing. So is it just the pipelines, or is it just that they're obsessed with Russia and they just want to dismember it, like Gates says Dick Cheney always wanted to just completely destroy Russia down to break it into little pieces? Or what is it about that they are so interested in this land so far from home?
I separate President Obama from a number of the others. I don't think President Obama wants a confrontation with Russia. I think he wanted a genuine reset. I think he wanted to work with Putin. Look, Putin he's an elected president, but he's an autocratic ruler. He's a very tough customer. He's a Russian nationalist. He is really, its validity, some people may question, but he clearly is trying to reestablish the Orthodox Church to find some kind of new basis for law and morality in Russia, because the communism just eradicated everything. And now communism itself has been rejected and repudiated by all the people, I think, over there, almost all of them. But you got to replace it with something. But I'll tell you, one of the things is there's a Russophobia in this town and an anti-Putin attitude, which I find it's just reflexively hostile almost, and seizing upon anything he does. Look, the Chinese are much more in terms of, I think, of human rights and political freedoms and freedom of the press and the rest of it. I mean, Russia is not as bad as China. You would not get away with some of the things they're doing in Russia. You would not get away with those in China or in Saudi Arabia. So I think that there's a genuine hostility here, and I think there's a real desire on the part of some people really to get back to the Cold War. They were happy in that kind of division, back and forth, going to conferences and, moving chess pieces around the board and all the rest of it. I mean, they've missed it.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, at this point, do you think, I don't know if you saw the latest headline is that Hillary Clinton, at least she's not officially in government now, but she didn't outright call Putin Hitler, but she compared him to Hitler, and Ukraine to Czechoslovakia, I guess. Do you think, are things just going to keep getting dumber and worse from here, or they can smooth things over now?
I wrote a book about that whole called Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost 500 pages, and it goes all the way back to getting into World War I. And frankly, there's a chapter on what happened to Czechoslovakia and what are the origins of that. I don't want to get into it right now, but that thing was a disaster waiting to happen, and the disaster was created at Versailles. You knew that thing was going to come apart, putting the Czechs in control of all those Germans and Slovaks and Hungarians and Poles and Ruthenians, and none of whom wanted to be under Prague. But that's, this is the point here is that there's no doubt that, Hillary, you really ought not to use the Hitler analogy, because all of a sudden we're into, who's the most evil man in all of history. But there's no doubt that ethnicity and tribe and nationality, these to me are the most powerful forces now in the world, and they're beginning to tear apart these transnational institutions, the UN, the EU, all the rest of it, and countries. Take a look at Scotland wants to break away from England, Catalonia wants to break away from Spain, the Western Ukraine would like to break away from the East Ukraine, the Crimea would like to break away from Ukraine altogether and go with Russia. All of these things. Look at the battle over Georgia. It was over Ossetia and Abkhazia. These are two small units that when Georgia broke away from the Soviet Union and from Russia, they broke away from Georgia. They said, we don't want any part of you. But this, and what I think the statesmen of the coming century are going to be people who find a way to accommodate all these forces without the kinds of terrible wars they almost inevitably bring. Scott, you take a look at India today. The BJP, this Hindu nationalist party, is rising toward power, and the Muslims, who I think number something like 170 million in India, they're going to be unhappy with a lot of things that are done, I think. And so all of these religion, culture, tribe, ethnicity, and race, these are the forces that are really pulling the world apart.
Right, because all those borders are in the wrong places, according to the things you just described there.
And I think it was H.G. Wells who wrote, and it's in my book, about, I think it was entitled The Natural Borders of the World. And they should be based upon, I think, language and ethnicity and nationality and peoplehood and culture and faith. And people who believe this is how nations form. And I think these, as I say, people are moving back toward these things. And as they do, they tend to separate from those who were their neighbors. Look at the Kurds. They're carving out their own nation out of Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria. Now, I think I'm all for it, but there's no doubt we can't give them a war guarantee because that's going to be a problem for all four of those nations going down the road.
Right. Yeah, well, and we sure, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the commentator, investment advisor Richard Mayberry, but he says, in the West, really no matter where you're from, if you're willing to cooperate with our system of limited law and property rights and that kind of thing, you can fit in here one way or the other. But in the old world, he calls it chaos stand, where all the lines are in the wrong places again, and where the easiest method of resolving disputes between individuals and factions, and that is property rights and law, without those things there, it's just one crisis after another, and it always will be. Maybe in 50 years, I think Mayberry actually predicts that one way or the other, America intervening or not, Russia will eventually break up, because there are all kinds of tiny little nations within Russia that most of us have never even heard of before, but they're there.
Now look at the battle going on, not only in Chechnya to break away, but in Dagestan and Ingushetia. Both of them, they've got battles going on there. And I've read of other ones out in Central Asia where these little enclaves want their own identity. Just like we mentioned, there's North Ossetia, South Ossetia, Abkhazia. And they're right bordering there on Georgia. And they want their own nationhood. But it can be done peacefully. Look what happened when Czechoslovakia broke apart in 1939 in March. The British gave a war guarantee to the Polish colonels they should never have given. But look what happened to Czechoslovakia. When was it? Just recently. I'm not sure if it was in the 90s. But Slovakia said we'd like to secede and set up our own country, and it was done peacefully.
I think it was in 91. I think it was before the end of 91. They were done.
And then, of course, look at Yugoslavia. Part of that was bloody. But Slovenia had to fight only 10 days, and they were gone. See, Slovenia and Croatia come out of the Habsburg Empire, and Serbia and some of the other places there were part of the Ottoman Empire. And you got that dividing line all the way through there. And so some are Catholic and some are Orthodox, and some look one way and some look another. And especially, of course, we had that horrible atrocities in World War II in the Balkan Peninsula, Serbs and Croats. And that explains the barbarity of the war they fought and the continued animosities there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, the American government will always be able to find something to point at as an excuse to intervene in the rest of the world forever. If the only criteria is that something bad is happening, then they have plenty to do.
But the American people are on. Some things are very hopeful. When Obama was there, talking, they were going to. I think Kerry was using the Hitler analogies back last summer, and Obama was all set to go and bomb or missile strikes on missile and bombing attacks on Syria, and the American people rose up and said, "Look, don't take us into that mess." And so Obama said, "I've got to get authorization from Congress." So he ran for cover, and Congress was hit with all manner of phone calls and letters and wires and everything. It was coming in 100 to 1. Don't get us into that mess. And he didn't. So I think the American people have a real ability. If now, if they will just speak up and say, keep us out of the Crimean Peninsula. We don't have a light brigade.
Right. Yeah, another Crimean War. It's so far from home. And now, and I'm sorry, because we're way over time, and I'll let you go if you got to go. But I wanted to ask you, just at the end here, as the rhetoric keeps increasing up until now, it seems like we're going to sanction you this, and we're going to kick you out of our co-NATO council that, and all of these things. Do you think this can be smoothed over pretty easily? You think it's much likely to, or very likely to get worse?
I think the reason is, you're talking about, they're going to put all these sanctions on Russia. We're going to sink their banks. You sink their banks, and they've got interbank relationships, and you'll pull down some others with it. And what do you do if, for example, Russia says, okay, you're sinking our banks. We're calling in our loans from Ukraine. We're going to charge them the full world price for oil and gas. We're not going to take any more of their exports, and we take more than anybody like that. and we're going to shut down the $15 billion we were lending them, and we're going to ask back the $2 billion we've already given them, or $4 billion we've already given them. That will leave us with a basket case nation the size of France and more populous than 4 of Greece. Do we really want that? I mean, you start this economic war, and it's the backlash comes immediately. You saw what happened in the stock market. The Dow Jones was down 200 on Monday, I think it was, and on Tuesday it came roaring back, and it looked like peace was breaking out.
Yeah. Well, I guess they succeeded. They didn't get Crimea invaded when they did the color-coded revolution of the Orange Revolution of 2004 there, and against the very same guy, right? Yanukovych.
Well, yeah, they threw him out then, and the Russians took it, and they waited 6 years, and they won the election when Yulia Tymoshenko, she's the gas princess, for heaven's sakes. And, there was corruption all through there, and there is corruption all through there, and it is awful, but that's exactly right. And you know what, really, I'm surprised that American journalists don't investigate all this money that the U.S. under the table moves into all these areas where we're preaching democracy and we're working under the table to buy elections, basically.
Right. There's a clip, and it's kind of mysterious to me, actually. It's Victoria Nuland speaking with a big chevron banner behind her to important people only, I think, in the room. It doesn't look like it's the official video of the event or anything, but I don't know if it's supposed to be an expose type of a leak either. But she's talking about how the U.S. government, has funneled $5 billion into Ukraine to support pro-democracy organizations. But I don't know the time frame there, Pat. Do you have a good guess at the time frame she's talking about? $5 billion?
That is an enormous amount of money into the politics of you. $5 billion, you could probably come close to. I wish I had that when I was running for president.
Yeah, you'd think that they'd have had this coup last November.
I can't believe that's an accurate figure, but why are the press not digging out this? I'll tell you, my guess is they probably got a lot of sources in these places.
Yeah, well, and, they're pretty lazy. They don't really want to learn much more than the party line because they got to go on in a few minutes, most of these TV news people.
Well, some of those do, but there's still some good journalists out there, I think, on these newspapers and also on the web. I read a lot of things I find very impressive on the web and a lot of websites, but I wonder why they just don't run down where they're putting all this. It reminds me of the old Comintern that the Soviets had, which was responsible for dumping over democratic countries and making them vote communist. And we just do we say it's fine for us to do it because we want them to reorient to the West. But those are Cold War institutions.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's it is kind of a reversal there, not just of right and left, but also of just, the global democratic revolution. That's what makes it okay, is it has that democratic in there. But it is, in a way, it's the domino theory with us as the Reds. And that once we spread democracy to this country, it's going to help catch on in the next country and the next country, too.
Yeah, what was that fellow that wrote the book, The End of History and the Last Man, that the inevitability of the democratic revolution worldwide? It seems some of our friends in Washington want to hurry it along a bit.
Right. Yeah, I agreed with your column back in 2004 that's it. Fallujah's the high tide of the empire, but I don't think the rest of them got the memo, Pat.
Well, I think they did. Look, are we in Fallujah now? No.
No. Yeah, well, they left there, but they don't seem like they're done yet.
Well, look, there's no doubt that there are people who would like to be still in there, but, Scott, there are some reasons to be optimistic here. We are out of Iraq, and it was a horrible situation, and all a lot of these guys, these wounded warriors, we see them on TV. We're coming out of Afghanistan. The stupid thing in Libya, that is over and done with, but we did not get involved in Syria. The American people rose up. The American people, as you say, are expressing themselves to stay out of Crimea. I think President Obama and the American military, they're not anxious to fight the Russians in Georgia or somewhere.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I think Dempsey helped. It wasn't just the American people. It was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff really told Obama what was what about Syria. So that's a pretty good coalition, the American people and the military against war. Maybe we can keep the eggheads in check together.
Well, they're getting, they keep, and they're more and more visible, yowling for this and yowling for that. With due respect to my former Republican colleague, John McCain, what he's been for the last 4 wars that didn't happen.
Yeah, well, and the 4 that did,
we're all Georgians now, and why aren't we moving into Syria? And we ought to send them, bring Georgia and Ukraine into NATO and all the rest of it.
Right. All right.
Listen, Scott, I've got to get going, my friend.
I know. I was going to say I've kept you way over time here, but thank you very much for your time on the show today, Pat. I really appreciate it.
Okay, you take it easy.
All right. Everybody, that is the great Pat Buchanan. You can find what he writes at antiwar.com/Pat. Well, it'll forward you on there. And the latest 2 are Ukraine's Crisis, Not Ours, and Tune Out the War Party.